Hey guys, Dr. Jake Dodds here, and we're back with another episode here, and we're talking about something really important. It's everywhere, it's pervasive, and it has way more of an impact on our health than people realize. So when you've been dealing with something like migraine headaches or a chronic condition for a long period of time, one of the big things that comes up is your body really gets depleted of energy. Like it's working too hard, it's been really trying to heal for a long time, and if it's been a battle that your body is losing, again, your energy goes down, and it's this downward cycle because the less energy you have, the less energy you have to go through a healing process. So being able to tip the scales back in your favor is a huge, huge thing to get back on the right track so you can feel how you want to. Now, one of our foundational layers that we've been talking about is obviously not losing energy. And so what we're talking about today is blue light toxicity, how it affects the body, and what we can do about it. So when we're looking at this whole topic, we really want to have a good understanding and a good baseline of what we're dealing with. So blue light comes in a couple different varieties. The first is our natural sunlight. So light only used to come from like sun and fire and natural sources. So when we have those things, the visible light spectrum comes together as a complete package. So we have reds, we have blues, we have greens, we have other colors. So for the sun, we get this whole package. There can be more blue light like at different times of the day, but again, it's coming in as a complete package, and there's different colors to essentially balance it out, if you will. Now, with artificial light, it's hard to imagine, but obviously artificial light's only been here for a small portion of human history. And the light bulb itself has changed a lot even over the past 30, 50 years. So when light bulbs first came out, it was called incandescent, and it actually was a lot more reflective of natural sunlight. So it threw up a lot of heat, there was a lot of reds with it that mixed in with the blues, so it was actually a lot more close to what we think of as natural light. So come in fluorescent lights. So as we've shifted that technology and got into fluorescent lights, we got into more blue. It's still kind of a package deal where we had some other colors with it. And then LEDs had come on the scene. So everyone was super excited because they were super, super bright. They had really good energy efficiency. And the reason for that is because it throws off this really intense light and it doesn't give off any heat. So no energy is lost to heat production. All the energy that's being used is used for light production. So really good from an energy standpoint. What we didn't consider though is, hey, how's that actually affecting the human body? And what we've learned in the last even 5 years or so is that artificial light in our body interacts with light in way more ways than anyone ever knew or thought possible. So artificial light hits our body a lot different than natural light does. So not only is it only blue light, it's estimated that the blue light intensity is about 3 times higher, so 300% more than we get from our natural sunlight. So not only do we not have any balance, but we got this super blue that's coming out right here. And so it's okay, well, who cares, or why is that a big deal? Well, we're gonna move into that next. So just to paint a picture, all this graph is showing here is light intensity or the amount of blue that we're getting and the time of day. So think morning, afternoon, and night. And then think how bright the light is throughout the day. So we got a nice sunrise, gets brighter in the middle of the day, and then we got a nice sunset at the end of the day. That's the natural cycle. And this is what our bodies were built around. So for most people, what we have for our light exposure throughout the day is really intense light for pretty much most of the day. We're not spending a whole lot of time outside. We have all these different types of blue light that are coming at us. And I'm gonna take a pause here as well because there's a lot of conversation with blue light in terms of screens. So most people know that your screen from your computer or your phone is throwing off blue light, and there's some cool things you can do to mitigate, and a lot of people are doing this. There's night shift mode to make it look more warm, and a few different things. And the reason I want to take a pause on this is because when you're talking about an LED light, the light that's coming out is blue. So even yellow looking street lamps and different lights like that, what they do is it's blue light that comes out of the bulb, and then what they do is they paint it with these things called yellow phosphors. So essentially it creates a little chemical reaction that makes the light look more yellowish, or can look really any different color. But at its core, what's still coming off is this really intense blue light. So even though visually it looks different to us, it's still hitting our body as this really intense blue light. So things like night shift and those kind of things can help with the amount of intensity of the light coming in. But in terms of the amount of blue light exposure, it doesn't actually help a whole lot. Blue light blockers and some other things in terms of the glasses can help with that. But I just want you to understand those two things is if you're dealing with artificial light these days, there's a 99% chance that you're dealing with a ton of blue light that's coming at you. And the other thing I want us to understand is light doesn't only interact with our eyes. What scientists have found in the past 5 or 10 years is there's actually all these photophores and chromophores all over your body in your skin that interact with light as well. So our bodies are not only interacting with light through our eyes, but our skin is actually picking this stuff up too. So sometimes like even we're putting on the blue light blockers and everything, we think we're like good to go. There's still an interaction with that blue light that needs to be considered. So again, like our bodies are built for this, like to ramp up to more intense light and come back down. And for most of us, we're spending like most of the time indoors. We're surrounded by artificial lights. They're kind of everywhere. So we're just riding this like high wave of intense light all the time. Now here's where the rubber meets the road. Like who cares? Like what does this all even mean? Well, I want to talk about 3 really important ways that this really hits our body in a big way. The first is our hormones. So there's hundreds and thousands of different hormone interactions in our body. And again, this is not by no means an exhaustive list, but I want to touch on a couple things here. So the first one is the hormone dopamine. It's extremely important in our brains. And essentially what dopamine does is it not tricks our brain, but what it does is it gets our brain excited about something good that's going to happen. So it can be good for helping us get motivated, and it can interact with our brain in some really useful ways. It can be hard too though, because if we get too much dopamine, this is the addiction chemical. So whenever you hear about like drug addiction or anything like that, like this is how almost all drugs work, is it releases this flood of dopamine into your brain. Your brain thinks, oh my gosh, like something really good is gonna happen. The problem is like nothing great actually happens, and then once you come down off that dopamine crash, just like a drug addict, you start to feel depressed, and then what happens is you need more dopamine next time to get back to even like feeling of a baseline of good, and then it's like that whole negative cycle. You need more dopamine crash, more dopamine crash. So you might be saying like, hey, I'm not on drugs, but guess what? Like the blue light actually is an activating hormone, and it's designed to ramp our brains up. And so if we're spending all day, every day in this blue light stimulation, our brains start cranking dopamine when they're not supposed to. Our brains start cranking dopamine for way too long at way too high of a rate. So essentially, our brains can start to act drug addict-like, right? Like, and you may have even heard this. It's estimated that most teenagers are looking at their phones 150 to 300 times a day, spending more than 8 to 10 hours looking at blue light. So it not only is it not that we're getting outside as much as we used to, we're just like bathed in this blue light all the time. And again, like it was never really appreciated how light could affect our brain chemistry, but it does in a really big way. So if you have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, if you're like, man, I used to have like things that I really enjoy doing, and I just like don't feel like that anymore. Or like I have things I know I would like to do, but I just feel like I can't find the motivation to get there. A lot of people are dealing with hormone imbalances. Dopamine is a huge one, like anxiety, depression, like a lot of these negative emotions that show up for us that a lot of people are struggling with on a day-to-day basis are directly tied to dopamine. So if you've been feeling like that and you haven't looked at this blue light stuff, really take a look at it, because it can start to feel like, man, this just like feels like me, like I guess just like this is how I'm built kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be that way. Your brain is going to be responsive to the environment that you put it in, and blue light is something that needs to be looked at really closely. So dopamine is one of the big ones that can get affected, and it's super important to look at because it is such a central way that our brain interacts with the world and how we feel about ourselves. So make sure we don't disregard that. The other one I want to touch on is cortisol. And again, the idea here is that blue light is stimulating to our body. So it's designed like in the middle of the day, we want to be like really active and make sure we have energy to do things. So when the blue light comes in the sun, like that's good for the middle of the day when we want to be productive. But again, if we're riding this like high octane energy pony all the time, your cortisol is your stress hormone. So it does things like increase heart rate, increase blood pressure. It's known as the stress activation hormone. And again, these are good things. Like when it's used appropriately, like you want to be able to regulate your blood pressure and increase that and decrease as you need to. So if you start to lose control over cortisol though, again, we end up in this like hyper stress state all the time. And there's like a laundry list of things that will show up in terms of how that affects your body. You may have heard the term adrenal fatigue. Your adrenals are what produce cortisol. So like, again, if you're running a system that was only designed to be used for short pockets of time, all the time at this like high octane level, you're going to get depleted, and people start to feel burnout, frustrated, and tired. Similar conversation with the thyroid. So the interesting thing about the thyroid is it's an organ that sits right here in the neck, but there's not very much that sits over the top of it. So the skin is very thin here, and there's not a whole lot of buffer. So the interesting thing about blue light is it actually penetrates through the skin 1 to 3 centimeters deep. And so guess what? We're looking at our phones, we're looking at our computers, and we're pretty close here. So we have this blue light It's coming in, it can actually penetrate the neck and directly get to the thyroid. The reason we care about that is because blue light by its nature is going to be inflammatory over time. So same thing, how many people, or maybe yourself, are dealing with thyroid issues and you've been told like, hey, your thyroid hormones are off or all this stuff's going on, and you're kind of asking like, why is this happening? And nobody's quite sure. And obviously this isn't like the only thing that affects the thyroid, but it's for sure one that does not get talked about nearly enough. So if there's thyroid issues going on, these are what, they're essentially your central regulatory hormones for your metabolism. So some people, the weight goes really high, you have a hard time getting it off, or like some people just starts getting hyperactive and you have a hard time keeping it on weight, or just like tired, you feel really tired sometimes, or like almost manic energy sometimes. So thyroid, again, is really important for our basic functioning of life, and if we're getting this hyper-inflammatory response on the thyroid 24/7, it can start to throw things off. So this is another really important thing to consider as far as blue light goes. The last one is possibly even more important than the others, if we can even say that, but the mitochondria. So again, this is the stuff inside your cells that's responsible for producing energy for your body in a form called ATP. And essentially what we have is kind of like a nice little assembly line where your body takes these compounds and electrons and passes it through these different proteins. So essentially we're just looking at these three circles here. So a nice conveyor belt, as long as things are flowing smoothly through there, your body can make energy like it needs to. What happens with blue light exposure on a constant basis is same thing, your mitochondria are hyper-stimulated. So instead of being like warming up to the middle of the day and then cooling down at the end of the day and getting a nice rest period, it's like blue light in the morning, blue light in the afternoon, blue light at night. Like maybe a lot of times there's even blue light shining on our bodies at night through different things as well. So essentially mitochondria start getting hyperinflamed and they get overactivated as well. So what happens instead of this nice assembly line where we have these three circles nice and close together is everything starts to swell and space out. So the reason this matters is because now our assembly line, instead of passing one thing nicely to the next person, like there's stuff flying all over the factory. So what that means is your body can't create energy like it wants to or it needs to. Your ATP production goes way down. So again, this is what our body uses for energy. And I hear this for people with migraine headaches all the time. It's like, I feel like so sluggish going throughout the day. Like I can barely even do the things that I need to do, much less the things that I want to do. And the other hard part about this is electrons are supposed to pass to you really nicely. If that's not happening, your electrons kind of start flying around all over the place where they're not supposed to. So maybe you've heard the term reactive oxygen species or free radical. Like that's what that's talking about, is you have electrons starting to fly all over your body where they're not supposed to go. They crash into things like DNA, they start messing up biomechanical processes. So not only do you have less energy than you want, all of a sudden your body is like having this train wreck that it needs to try to clean up, and now the energy that it does have is trying to clean up stuff and not actually going through the healing process like you want it to. So again, it becomes this really bad downward spiral for people, and I've heard that for a lot of people as well. It's like I feel like I can't get back on track kind of thing. So all of this is to say, we want to start with our foundational stuff, because a lot of times we try to jump to like a really complicated solution, or we feel like we just need like one supplement or something to get back on track. It's usually we got like 15, or more different stressors stacked on top of each other. I really encourage you to look at blue light, because this is one that hardly ever gets talked about. As you can see, it affects some really foundational pieces of our body and how we function. So this background information is to allow you to say like, hey, this is something that can be affecting my body. I need to start to make a change on this. So stay tuned for future videos. We're going to be continuing to talk about other things that can bleed your body of energy and make sure that we can get back on track to a better space.